Welcome back to U.S. Mint Mysteries. Today, we're diving deep into the world of Kennedy half dollars, and I can promise you, this is not your average coin hunt. Some of these ordinary-looking halves have sold for jaw-dropping amounts that will leave you stunned. Imagine a coin sitting quietly in your pocket change that could be worth tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. These aren't just pieces of metal, they're hidden treasures waiting to be discovered. So grab your magnifying glass and let's uncover the top 8 most valuable Kennedy half dollars ever found. And before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button because you don't want to miss the rarest discoveries that could be sitting in your very own collection. First up, the 1967 Kennedy half dollar. At first glance, this coin may not seem like anything extraordinary. After all, millions were struck during the late 1960s, and most people assume it's just another common half dollar. But don't be fooled, this coin tells a fascinating story about America's history, a turbulent period in the late 60s, and a hidden treasure that could still be sitting unnoticed in pocket change or in a dusty coin jar. Now, 1967 was the third year of production for the Kennedy half dollar. The coin was first introduced in 1964, right after the tragic assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and Americans embraced it as both a circulating coin and a lasting tribute to their beloved president. By 1967, however, silver was becoming scarce, and the U.S. Mint had already reduced the silver content. These halves were struck in 40% silver rather than the 90% silver used in 1964. Which already makes them interesting. They were struck without a mint mark, meaning, whether it was made in Philadelphia or Denver, the coin carries no mint identity. For most, this detail slips by unnoticed, but for collectors, it sparks curiosity. The design itself is iconic. On the obverse, you see the bold profile of President Kennedy facing left, with the word liberty arching across the top. The motto, "In God We Trust," rests just below his chin, and the date, 1967, anchors the bottom. On the reverse, the great presidential seal dominates the coin, with the American eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch surrounded by 50 stars. It's a coin that radiates pride, history, and symbolism. But here's where it gets exciting. The 1967 Kennedy half dollar, in circulated condition, may look worn and ordinary, but collectors hunt for these coins because even circulated examples carry real silver value. Today, just the silver content alone is worth several dollars, far more than face value. But when you start moving up the scale, from well-worn coins to lightly circulated ones, values begin to climb. A nice example might bring in $10, $20, or even $50 depending on eye appeal. But the real shock comes when you find a coin that wasn't just lightly circulated, but survived in excellent condition or with a rare error. And errors are where the real money lives. Some 1967 halves have been discovered with dramatic double strikes, where the coin's details were imprinted twice, giving Kennedy's profile a ghost-like shadow. Others show die clashes, where parts of the reverse design accidentally transferred to the obverse, creating eerie, one-of-a-kind markings. Then there are off-center strikes, where the design is shifted so noticeably that collectors are willing to pay huge premiums. These mistakes, which slipped past mint quality control, can transform what looks like a common half dollar into a rarity worth thousands. One stunning example of a 1967 Kennedy half-dollar error, sold for more than $12,000 at auction. Yes, that's right, $12,000. Next up, we move to the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar. At first, this coin might look like just another half from the 1970s, but don't let appearances fool you. The 1973 issue is one of the most surprising in the Kennedy series, because it hides a twist most people don't know. This coin was never intended for everyday circulation. That little detail alone has turned the 1973 half into one of the most desirable treasures for collectors. Here's why. By the early 1970s, the half dollar had already lost its place in American commerce. People just weren't using them anymore. In fact, vending machines and cash registers weren't built for them, and the public preferred quarters and dollar bills. Because of this, in 1973, the Mint decided to produce Kennedy half dollars only for collectors. That means no rolls went out to the banks, no circulation release at all. They were struck in limited numbers and only available in mint sets and proof sets. For that reason, finding a 1973 Kennedy half dollar in circulation is already an exciting surprise. The design remains the same, with Kennedy's strong profile on the obverse, the bold word Liberty overhead, and the date 1973 sitting proudly below. On the reverse, the presidential seal still shines with an eagle holding arrows and an olive branch, surrounded by stars. But here's where the magic lies. It's not just about design, it's about condition. These coins, since they were only in sets, tend to survive in far better shape than those that were tossed around in circulation. That's why high grades are possible, and high grades mean serious money. Take a standard 1973 Kennedy half dollar in average condition from a set, and you might get just a few dollars. But when you move into pristine, uncirculated territory, the values start climbing. MS-65 examples might fetch $30 to $50, which already beats the face value. But when you step into the elite levels, coins graded MES-67 or MS-68, the prices skyrocket. Collectors have paid thousands for examples with razor-sharp details, brilliant luster, and zero marks. One extraordinary 1973 D. Kennedy half-dollar graded MS-67 plus sold for well over $11,000 at auction. And remember, this is a coin that technically should have never seen the inside of a bank or a cash drawer. Now, let's talk about the 1973 proofs. The Mint struck beautiful proof versions in San Francisco with the S Mint mark, and these are stunning coins with mirror-like fields and frosted designs. Ordinary proofs can be found for $10 or $20, but deep cameo examples, with strong contrast between the frosted portrait and shiny background, have fetched jaw-dropping sums. A flawless proof 70 deep cameo can command thousands. Imagine pulling one of those out of an old proof set that's been sitting forgotten in someone's drawer for 50 years. And then, of course, there are the errors. Every collector dreams of stumbling on one of those rare mistakes that slipped past the Mint. Off-center strikes, doubled dies, and wrong planchet errors are the holy grail here. One of the wildest discoveries was a 1973 Kennedy half dollar accidentally struck on a silver planchet left over from earlier issues. That error pushed the value of the coin into the high five figures. And that's the kind of surprise that keeps collectors searching. Some even speculate that in pristine condition, with the right error, a 1973 could break into the six-figure range. So here we have it. A half dollar most people would have dismissed, but in reality, one that hides a secret legacy. It wasn't released into circulation like the others, making it scarcer by nature. And when you combine that with top condition and rare errors, you're looking at a coin that can shock the collecting world with unbelievable prices. The 1973 Kennedy half dollar reminds us that rarity doesn't always come from being old or made of silver. Sometimes it comes from decisions made quietly by the Mint that most people never even heard about. And that's why, if you ever find a 1973 half, whether in a collection, a coin jar, or even tucked away in a proof set, don't underestimate it. Because what looks like a simple half dollar could very well be worth thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of dollars. Next up, we arrive at the 1988 D. Kennedy half dollar. Now, at first glance, this might look like one of the most ordinary coins you could ever find. After all, by the late 1980s, Kennedy halves were struck in huge numbers, mostly ignored by the public, and often left sitting in bank vaults or coin rolls. But the 1988 D has proven time and again that even a modern-looking coin, one many people would never give a second thought, can surprise collectors with values that make jaws drop. Here's the background. In 1988, the Denver Mint struck over 23 million Kennedy half-dollars. Because they were made of a copper-nickel clad composition instead of silver, most folks treated them like pocket change, not collectibles. They were rarely used in daily transactions, and many just sat untouched in rolls or bags. But here's the twist. In the world of coin collecting, sheer numbers don't always matter. Condition, rarity of errors, and grading all play massive roles, and that's exactly why the 1988 D has become so fascinating. The design is the same beloved Kennedy profile we've come to know. His bold portrait facing left, liberty stretching across the top, "In God we trust" beneath his chin, and the date, 1988, proudly below. Flip the coin over, and you'll see the striking presidential seal, with its eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch, encircled by 50 stars, classic, patriotic, and instantly recognizable. But while the design didn't change, what makes the 1988 D valuable is all about how it survived, or how it didn't. Let's start with circulated examples. A worn 1988-D is usually only worth face value, maybe a small premium for collectors filling an album slot. But when you find one that never touched circulation, a coin pulled straight from a mint roll or bag and preserved perfectly, the story changes fast. Mint state coins, graded MMS 65, are worth around $20 to $30. But when you jump into the top populations, with grades of MS 67 and above, the value explodes. That's because only a tiny fraction of coins survive without scratches, bag marks, or dull luster. One stunning 1988 D in MS 67 condition recently sold for more than $2,000. And in MS 68, an almost flawless example, prices have reached into the $5,000 to $10,000 range. Imagine holding what looks like a common clad half, only to realize it's worth more than a used car. But wait until you hear about the errors. This is where the thrill of the hunt really comes alive. Collectors have uncovered 1988 D halves struck off-center, creating bizarre-looking coins with part of Kennedy's face missing or shifted. Others have found double-die obverses, where the inscriptions or date show a shadow-like doubling effect, instantly multiplying value. Then there are wrong plancher strikes. A 1988 D half accidentally struck on a quarter plancher, weighing less and missing parts of the design. One of these wild errors sold for over $15,000 at auction. And experts believe if a pristine, high-grade wrong plancher or dramatic error were discovered today, it could push into the six-figure territory. Think about that for a moment. A coin minted in the millions, ignored by cashiers, sitting in dusty drawers for decades. Yet in the right condition or with the right error, it transforms into a hidden fortune. That's the kind of shock factor that keeps collectors digging through rolls, examining details under magnification, and never overlooking a single Kennedy half. So the next time you stumble across a 1988 D, don't toss it aside as just another clad half-dollar, because history has shown us that what looks like pocket change could be a rare gem, a coin that flips expectations upside down, and one that might just leave you staring in disbelief when you see what it's truly worth. Next up, we come to the 1979 Kennedy half-dollar, a coin that, on the surface, seems like one of the most ordinary pieces of pocket change from the late 1970s. Millions of these were struck, and at first glance, you might think it's worth no more than 50 cents. But this is where the Kennedy series always catches us off guard. Even a coin from 1979 in fine condition can hide surprises that collectors are eager to uncover. Now, let's set the stage. By 1979, the Kennedy half-dollar had already shifted away from its original silver composition. The 90% silver coins of 1964 were long gone, and the 40% silver issues from the late 60s and early 70s had also ended. What remained was the copper-nickel-clad half-dollar, just like today's quarters and dimes, but with a bold design and a much larger size. Because of this, fewer people bothered to use them. Half dollars had become impractical in everyday transactions, and most ended up sitting in rolls, drawers, or mint bags, bypassing circulation altogether. The design itself still carried the same dignity and strength. On the obverse, Kennedy's profile faces left, with "Liberty" across the top, "In God We Trust" just beneath, and the date 1979 stamped clearly at the bottom. The reverse remains one of the most patriotic designs in American coinage: the presidential seal, an eagle holding arrows, and an olive branch, surrounded by a circle of stars. Even in fine condition, where some wear softens the details, the overall look is still unmistakably bold. In fine condition, most 1979 Kennedy halves are worth slightly more than face value, often $1 or $2 because of collector demand. But the real magic begins when you look beyond average pieces. Coins with exceptional eye appeal, sharp details despite circulation, or unique mint errors can fetch far more. This is why even a coin labeled "fine" should never be dismissed too quickly. One area collectors pay close attention to is errors. Some 1979 halves show doubling on the obverse, where parts of the lettering or Kennedy's profile appear shadowed. These doubled die errors can multiply a coin's value several times over. Others have been discovered with off-center strikes, dramatic enough that portions of Kennedy's portrait or the date are missing entirely. Then there are wrong plancher errors. A 1979 half-dollar struck on a quarter blank, creating a smaller, lighter coin with incomplete designs. One such spectacular error brought in more than $10,000 at auction. But even without errors, high-grade examples of the 1979 Kennedy half-dollar can shock collectors. While fine-condition coins are modestly valued, mint state survivors are a different story. In MS-66 or MS-67, they have sold for hundreds, even thousands of dollars. One blazing 1979-D graded MS-67 drew more than $6,000 at auction. Imagine the contrast: a coin most people would overlook in a change jar, suddenly commanding a price tag equal to a luxury vacation. Proofs from San Francisco also exist for this year, carrying the S mint mark, and these coins can be found in old proof sets. While many sell for just a few dollars, perfect deep cameo Proof 70 examples can shock the market, with prices soaring into the thousands. So, when you hold a 1979 Kennedy half-dollar in fine condition, don't dismiss it as just another worn coin. Even circulated halves can carry collector interest, and if you happen to stumble upon a rare error or an uncirculated gem hiding in a collection, you could be looking at a treasure that shocks even seasoned numismatists. The lesson of the 1979 is simple. Never underestimate the power of condition, rarity, and error in transforming an everyday half-dollar into a coin worth thousands. That's the thrill of the hunt, and it's why Kennedy half-dollars continue to surprise us, decade after decade. Next up, we arrive at the 1974 Kennedy half-dollar, and this is where things start to get really exciting. At first glance, it might look like just another half-dollar from the 1970s, but this coin carries one of the most famous and valuable varieties in the entire Kennedy series. Collectors around the country know it well, and the prices it has fetched at auction will make your jaw drop. The background is important. By 1974, the Kennedy half-dollar had firmly transitioned into copper-nickel clad composition. Silver was gone, and these coins were minted in massive numbers for circulation. Both the Philadelphia and Denver mints struck millions of them, and San Francisco produced beautiful proof versions for collectors. Because so many were made, the average 1974 half-dollar in circulated condition is still only worth around face value. But hidden among these ordinary coins is a legendary treasure that can turn 50 cents into tens of thousands of dollars. The design remains the same as earlier issues. Kennedy's left-facing portrait on the obverse, Liberty stretching across the top, "In God We Trust" beneath his chin, and the year 1974 stamped below. The reverse showcases the striking presidential seal, the American eagle clutching arrows, and an olive branch encircled by stars. On the surface, it's just another patriotic design. But in 1974, something extraordinary happened during production at the Denver Mint. This was the year of the famous 1974 D-doubled die obverse. During the die-making process, one obverse die received a strong doubling, creating a dramatic effect that made "In God We Trust" and "Liberty" appear shadowed and doubled. This error went unnoticed at first, but once collectors started discovering it, the demand went through the roof. The 1974 D, doubled die, is now one of the most desirable Kennedy half-dollar errors ever made. Ordinary 1974 halves in worn condition might fetch 50 cents to $1. A nice uncirculated example can bring $5 to $20. Proof coins from San Francisco may range from $10 to $50 depending on quality. But the doubled die? That's where the values skyrocket. Circulated examples of the 1974 D doubled die can sell for hundreds. Uncirculated examples often range from $1,000 to $3,000. But when you step into the top-graded territory, the numbers get mind-blowing. A near-perfect example of this variety has sold for over $45,000 at auction. That's right, a Kennedy half-dollar from 1974 struck by accident with a doubled die, commanding the kind of price you'd expect from a rare gold coin. And here's what's truly shocking. Experts believe many of these coins are still out there. Because they look so ordinary at first glance, countless people have probably spent them without realizing what they had in their hands. That means the next Kennedy half-dollar you pick up could hold the key to a life-changing discovery. The thrill of the 1974 is simple. It teaches us that rarity doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, behind a design you've seen 1,000 times before. But for those willing to look closer, with a magnifying glass and a bit of patience, the reward can be staggering. So the next time you come across a 1974 Kennedy half-dollar, don't brush it aside. Examine it carefully, especially the "In God We Trust" and the word "Liberty." If you see that telltale doubling, you might just be holding a coin worth thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of dollars. Next up, we have the 1968 D Kennedy half-dollar. Now, this coin is special for more than one reason. On the surface, it might look like a typical late 1960s half-dollar, worn down from years of circulation. But dig a little deeper, and you'll discover that the 1968 D carries a legacy that makes collectors' hearts race. It's a coin that bridges history, silver, and one very important first in U.S. mint history. By 1968, the Kennedy half-dollar had already gone through some big changes. The original 1964 halves were struck in 90% silver. From 1965 to 1970, the mint reduced the silver content to 40%. And 1968 was right in that range, meaning every Kennedy half-dollar from this year still contains real silver. That alone makes it stand apart from most modern pocket change. In circulated condition, even a worn example has value far beyond its face, because silver is silver. Depending on the market, the silver melt value alone often runs $5 to $6, and sometimes more. But the story doesn't end there. The 1968 D holds the distinction of being the first Kennedy half-dollar to carry the D mint mark placed on the obverse, just below Kennedy's neck. That little letter tells us it was struck in Denver. And for collectors, mint marks are everything. It marked a new era for the series, and sharp-eyed collectors began paying close attention to details like this. Now, when we look at circulated 1968 D halves, most will be heavily worn, their silver luster dulled, and details softened from years of handling. These coins usually trade hands for just a bit above their melt value. But when you find one in better shape, lightly circulated with strong details still visible, the value begins to rise. Collectors will pay $10, $20, even $50 for attractive circulated examples, especially if they've been well preserved. And then we come to the true treasures, errors, and high-grade survivors. Some 1968 D Kennedy half-dollars have been found with doubled dies, where the lettering or date shows a shadow-like doubling. Others were struck off-center, with Kennedy's portrait shifted dramatically to one side. And then there are proof-like errors, rare examples struck with unusually sharp detail and mirrored surfaces, almost looking like proof coins, even though they were minted for circulation. These are the kinds of oddities that can push a 1968D from a few dollars into the hundreds or even thousands. Auction records tell the story best. A circulated 1968D with a dramatic off-center strike once sold for more than $3,000. High-grade mint state examples, graded MS 66 or higher, have commanded well over $10,000. And one remarkable coin in MS 67, nearly flawless with blazing silver luster, brought more than $25,000. That's right, a coin struck over half a century ago, one most people would assume was worth little more than its silver, ended up shocking collectors with five-figure prices. So, what makes the 1968D Kennedy half-dollar so valuable? It's the combination of silver content, historical significance as the first, with a Denver mint mark on the obverse, and the rare survivors in pristine condition or with eye-popping mint errors. Even a circulated coin has built-in silver value, making it a safe bet to hold. But if you happen to stumble across one in higher grade or with an unusual strike, you could be looking at a coin worth thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, of dollars. That's the thrill of the Kennedy series. What looks like a worn, ordinary half-dollar can carry hidden history and shocking value. The 1968D proves that sometimes even circulated coins are worth a second look, because you never know when one might turn out to be a life-changing treasure hiding in plain sight. Next up, we turn our attention to the 1972 D Kennedy half-dollar, a coin that might just shock you with how valuable it can be under the right circumstances. On the surface, it looks like another common clad half from the 1970s, and in fact, over 141 million were struck at the Denver Mint that year. With a number that high, most people assume these coins have no collector premium at all. But the 1972D hides one of the most fascinating twists in the entire series, one that has turned ordinary-looking halves into treasures worth tens of thousands of dollars. Here's the story. By 1972, the Kennedy half-dollar was well established, but the Mint was still working out technical challenges with its dies. For the Denver Mint, a small batch of coins was struck using a die that created a very unusual design on the reverse. Collectors now know it as the 1972 D No FG variety. The letters FG are the initials of Frank Gasparo, the chief engraver of the U.S. Mint, whose initials appear between the eagle's tail feathers and the leg on the reverse. On most coins, they're clearly visible, but on this variety, the initials are completely missing, wiped out during the polishing process. This tiny detail has created one of the most famous rarities in modern U.S. coinage. Now, let's put this in perspective. A circulated 1972 D Kennedy half-dollar with no special variety is generally worth just face value. 50 cents, maybe $1 or $2 for a collector filling a hole in an album. But when you find the No FG variety, everything changes instantly. Even circulated examples of the missing initial coin can sell for hundreds of dollars. Higher-grade circulated examples push into the thousands. And then, the real shock comes with uncirculated pieces. In mint state grades, the 1972 D No FG has sold for eye-popping amounts. MS 63 and MS 64 examples regularly bring $2,000 to $5,000. In MS 65, prices can hit $10,000 to $15,000. And one spectacular MS 65 example stunned the coin world when it sold for nearly $25,000. That's right. A Kennedy half-dollar that most people would overlook, written off as common pocket change, turned into a small fortune because of two missing letters. But it doesn't stop there. Other errors also exist for the 1972D, including off-center strikes, doubled dies, and even wrong plancher errors, where the coin was struck on blanks meant for quarters or dollars. These rarities can bring in hundreds or even thousands depending on their severity and condition. Finally, we arrive at the 1985 D. Kennedy half dollar. At first glance, this coin may look like just another common piece from the mid-80s, but don't be fooled. With over 26 million struck at the Denver Mint, the 1985 D is a workhorse of circulation. Most examples you'll see today are heavily worn, bearing all the signs of everyday use: scratches, flattened hair details, and rim dings. In circulated condition, they usually trade for 50 cents to $1, making them seem fairly unremarkable. But here's the twist. Collectors who chase Kennedy halves know that the 1985 D hides some powerful surprises in higher grades. Coins that manage to survive in near-perfect condition, graded MS-66 or MS-67 by PCGS or NGC, are rare. These sharply struck, lustrous examples can jump in value dramatically. In fact, an MS-67 1985D once sold for over $2,000, proving that even a relatively modern half dollar can bring a serious payday. Another factor is die quality. By the 1980s, the mint was striking so many coins that worn dies were common. This resulted in weak details, especially in Kennedy's hair and the eagle's feathers on the reverse. If you find a sharply struck 1985 D with minimal bag marks, that's a standout coin collectors are willing to fight over. Errors also spice up this year. Off-center strikes, double dies, and misaligned dies have all been reported on 1985 D halves, with certain dramatic examples selling for hundreds of dollars at auction. Combine that with the nostalgia many collectors have for the 1980s series, and you've got a coin that's more than just pocket change. So, while most 1985 D Kennedy half dollars will never rise above face value, the few that shine in gem condition or carry unique mint errors can turn into valuable treasures. It's the perfect reminder that every coin tells its own story, and sometimes the unlikeliest candidates become the stars of the show.